Hi.
Hi.
So this is the first, hopefully, in a series of top 10 tips from experienced directors. And what we just realised is there's very little about becoming a director or being a director. And what we thought would be really useful is to meet with directors to talk about their advice to directors at an early stage of their career. And today we're very lucky. We've got Alexander Weiss, who's come in to talk to us.
Yeah. So I would kick off with audience. I think putting your audience first is a really, really massively important thing. I think sometimes we get stuck in a bit of a bubble of making work for ourselves, for our peers. We get into a bubble of making work for ourselves in terms of our careers and progressing. And I think the one thing that we have to keep reminding ourselves is like why we're doing it. The people who are going to buy tickets, the audience members, they are the most important people that will ever be a part of your process. More important than the actors and the other creatives that you work with, the audience are like integral to theatre. Without an audience, there is no theatre. Your show has to be watched. So it feels really important to like think about your audience, like who is your audience, where are they, what kind of provocations do you want to give them, making work that has like some kind of like strong connection and resonance to like today. I think is really important, and to like create work that allows your audience to like really question and think about the world in which we are in now, because I kind of feel as if it's the one kind of like really strong device that we have kind of in relation to other art forms, I guess, to really, really allow your audience to sit in a room together with lots of other different people and think about what the world is and what society is. So putting your audience first is really, really important. The second thing that I think is really important is time. And like when you're working with anybody, that time is so precious. When we are working on productions, there's always a limited time. There's like a date that the show has to happen. There's a date that you've got to begin making it. And thinking about the way in which you use time, making sure that you remember that like time is precious, not just for you, but for everyone else. Making sure that you're not wasting people's time. So being prepared, making sure that you have really clear objectives for each session that you have. Like if you have a design meeting, you know like what it is that you're trying to aim for, or that you go in with some kind of provocation so that it means that the time is used well. Making sure that when you're working with actors that like you're not calling an actor if they're not needed for like 10 pages or something, that they're not just sitting around, unless that's a really important part of your process. But most of all for yourself, making sure that you're making the best use of your time, because the worst thing, and I find myself kind of like falling in this scenario a little bit when I was quite early on in my career, is that like I'd be having a great time and not have been really like planned in terms of like what I want to achieve each day. And then you get to like week 3 and you're like, oh my God, and somebody wants to come in and watch a run and you haven't finished it. And then it leaves everyone feeling really vulnerable. And you don't like, and that's not really where you want to be, because then it means that people forget about like being really clear and telling the story and go into like self-preservation mode and start doing all sorts of things that maybe aren't necessarily like the things that you are aiming to do. So I think like being really clear with yourself about what you use your time for, and also like time outside of rehearsals as well, for yourself, making sure that you find ways to keep that occupied, like reading, plotting, planning, that kind of thing. Like, yeah, really making creative use of time. The next piece of advice is one that I want to give about assisting. So I think that assistant directing is like being an assistant director is like probably the most undefined role in theatre. And it can feel really, really difficult to be able to navigate that and know what your currency is in any rehearsal room. And I think working out like what your dynamic is with the actors, what your dynamic is with the director, can feel quite difficult, but giving like I guess like for one, trying like not speaking, just listening and trying to figure out like where you can pitch yourself, figure out like what the needs of the company are. That feels like something that I found really useful in my career. I think also sometimes if you are in a scenario where you don't feel like you are being used very well, I think it is important to like, in a way, put yourself in an imaginary scenario where you are directing it. So you're kind of shadow directing the entire production so that you are like mentally experiencing and planning like every stage of it. I found that really, really useful, especially in the rooms where I kind of was sat somewhere in a corner and maybe not as acknowledged as I wanted to be. But also like something that is really important about that is to remember that like for directors, it can be a little bit exposing, it like having another director in the room or might feel a little bit intimidating. And that isn't anything that you can help, like how somebody might feel about you isn't always something that you can change. But sometimes just knowing that like it's a really delicate kind of relationship and remembering that can be really useful, I think, in terms of just navigating that relationship and making sure that you don't take everything too personal.
Can I ask you, now you have assistants,
Yeah.
what do you look for in an assistant?
What do I look for in an assistant? So I think what I look for is like, I mean, again, some like planning for me is like really, really important. And sometimes I'm really great at it and sometimes I don't really know where to start. And I think like for me, sometimes having somebody to like riff with can be really useful, or just a sounding board. So usually somebody that is like confident enough to like really listen and maybe not constantly looking for an opportunity to prove themselves. So like a real confidence in like in what their ability is, I think is really important for me. I think also like I really love people that are really good at research as well. Because research is really hard and like we've been taught to be quite lazy because of like technology and the internet. And so like, you know, people that can really geek out on, I don't know, ants in Southern Africa or something, whatever, you know, like that feels like, it feels quite important that like for me to have somebody that is really happy to like decide to be the expert on this thing and is like, you know, just great in terms of like filing that information in their mind and being able to like pick and choose it when we need it and find those moments to kind of like bring it into the room. And I think also like being sensitive, like I feel like when you're able, like it feels like I guess like for me, it felt like when I realized that I truly was ready to direct was when I was assisting and I was able to be sensitive enough to not think about myself and what I needed and like solely just think about the production, what the production needed. And to be like fully invested, even though I wouldn't necessarily reap the same rewards, but I noticed like a sign of maturity in myself. And I find that like in assistants that I look for, like when I'm looking for assistants, that like it feels really important that somebody is like sensitive enough to like put the production first. Because it means that when I disappear and go and work on something else, or if I have to take a morning somewhere else, I know that I can trust that person to to like deliver the like creative vision that myself and the team are trying to create, rather than like suddenly impose something new. So yeah, sensitivity I think is really important. Yeah, I think something that I think is important to think about as directors is like vision as well. And I feel like I don't know, I feel like I'm a little bit controversial when it comes to vision, because I kind of feel like you can kill a production with too much vision. Like, for me, it feels really important to think about what it feels like what is the experience that you want to give to an audience, because you solely can't be responsible for a vision, because in a way it's something that you see in your mind, but your designer is never going to see exactly what you see, and neither is your sound designer or your video designer or your actors. And I think direction is about, like, for me, in terms of vision, it's just about like giving really clear, like, this is where we're heading. Like, when I worked on The Mountaintop, it felt really important to me that the audience knew that this young woman, by the end of the play, as she speaks this poem, that her body has experienced all the trauma that, like, I guess humankind has experienced. If you don't know the story, it might be a bit confusing. But, like, you know, I just said, like, I want it to feel like painful and a bit like surprising, and for it to feel like we're being bombarded by, like, all of this information. But I didn't know what it would look like or what it would sound like. And I think, you know, it was a little bit frustrating for some of the people that I was working with, but, like, I felt like it reaped really, like, great results, because it meant that we were all collectively, creatively thinking about, like, all of the ways that we could add different elements, and I felt like we were really truly collaborative, and we all came up with something that none of us ever imagined it would be. And I think that's the most exciting thing about working with other people. And I feel like the times when I have absolutely seen exactly, like, what it should look like and what it is, I think are the times when I've probably struggled the most, like, because I'm having this, like, strange internal battle where I'm like, that's not what I want, that's not what it should be, and it becomes about me rather than about us. And you know, your designers and your actors are not, and your writers are not, they're not there to facilitate you. I think you're the facilitator for them. And so it needs to be about, like, offering, I guess, provocation and direction for them to kind of, like, move towards, but not being prescriptive. And I think that's why I say, like, thinking about what it should feel like rather than creating a, like, very specific vision. So, working with actors, something that I think is, like, really important always to remember is that, like, you know, no matter how, like, you might feel about actors, and sometimes it can be scary working with actors, and sometimes actors can be badly behaved and also wonderful and whatever. There is no theatre without them. If you don't have actors, then it's an installation or something else, but it's not theatre. And I think, you know, what they do is incredibly brave and incredibly vulnerable. And I think it's important to, like, respect that. Like, in fact, I think actors are like superheroes. There's, like, no other job where, like, you get told no, like, at least twice a week, and maybe once like every 6 months you get a yes. But you're still able to like keep up your morale, keep going, come into a room with like new people, build new relationships, like cry like that, laugh like that, learn lines, pages and pages of lines in order, you know, move and make tea and cook spaghetti. And like, I think, yeah, we really underestimate sometimes like just how difficult it is sometimes to be an actor, just how vulnerable it is to be an actor. And I think it's important to kind of like, to really be empathetic to like the journey that actors need to go on, the space that actors need in a room when you're creating something. It feels like, I don't know, in my experience, I feel like actors make the best work when you give them freedom to, but also like being really clear about like what you're trying to set, like what you're trying to achieve is really important. So it's like, I don't know, I kind of see it like creating I don't know, a frame or a structure, a jungle gym in a way, and allowing your actors to like jump up and down and like almost do anything that they like. And then when it feels like the actor is maybe like, I don't know, going on the monkey bars over that way, then it's like, no, you need to come back and stay in this structure, stay in this, you know. So giving your, like creating the playground for the actors and trusting them to be like, you know, they have brilliant instincts, which is probably the reason why you've hired them, and making like really capitalizing on like their instincts and their brilliance by allowing them to like really play. Like those are the times when I feel like I've really like got the most amazing performances out of actors. But I think also like it's important to like be able to push actors as well. Like that's absolutely fine. Like to feel confident enough to know when you need to like ask an actor like just go the extra mile. I think that's an important thing to be able to do as well. The next kind of tip I wanted to give is kind of about writers and working with writers. Especially on new plays, I think something that we like forget a little bit, like we get a bit carried away with the story that we've got, but we sometimes forget that like the playwright has been with the story the longest and probably has the most emotional investment. And when you can like put that into context, that is probably like the reason why, you know, the writer is like maybe like really involved or a bit nervous or very nervous. Like, and I think sometimes it's important to remember like the kind of like emotional stakes that like the playwright has in the piece of work that you're creating together. And that you're merely a facilitator in a way, that you really give space to their vision. Because on a new play, the play in a way is like the star of the show. The play is the thing that everyone's like, there's a new story in town. What is this new story? Everyone wants to know what that is. And I think like you've got to really like give space to the play to really sing, and make sure that like everything that you do is about like freeing the story and making the best possible like premiere of the story, rather than thinking about the really cool transition that you can do that might help you to get your next job or something like that. Like, yeah. And I think also like, because working on new plays, sometimes you can get a little bit worried about like your visibility as a director. But I think like anybody that knows what good directing is can see good work, even if it's not apparent in like big movement sequences or like flashy lights and video. sometimes it's like the measure, the tempo, the like confidence of the actors, all of that sort of thing. Those are like great signs of like really good and clear direction. So yeah. The next thing that I would like give as a piece of advice is to really anchor yourself in the real world. I feel like when we work in theatre, we commit so much of our like time and energy and who we are to like our jobs, and we sometimes like forget like that the real world that we're actually trying to imitate on stage is actually out there. So like it feels really important to like stay connected with the real world. For a long time, I like worked as a wine waiter in hotels and stuff like that. And I found that stuff like really, really fascinating. And I feel like I met like such a breadth of people with so many different experiences, who spoke so many different languages, and from so many different parts of the world. And I feel like I don't know, my kind of cultural reservoir really expanded actually working in places like that. And I'm not saying that like you should go out and get a job as a wine waiter, but I am saying that like making sure that you like keep regular contact with the real world is a really important thing. And you know, don't spend all of your nights at theatres drinking wine. Like actually connect with people.
Serve it instead.
Yeah, actually serve it instead. Exactly. I would say the next piece of like really, really important advice actually that I think I'm really trying to think about myself now actually is looking after yourself. Like directing, you know, everybody says it, like directing can be really lonely, it can be really vulnerable. You know, actors can get away with being in a bad production, and everyone else really. But like when the production isn't good, it's all on you. Which might sound a bit like doom and gloom, but like, you know, what that means is that like you take so much responsibility, you shoulder so much tension, you navigate so many relationships on a daily basis, from like working with actors to speaking to artistic directors to the writer, designers, press and marketing, stage management, thinking about audiences, worrying about whether the show is selling and what could be done better to like get more tickets in, making sure that you've sent invites to the right people, what you're going to wear on press night, what gifts you're going to give to people on press night. Like you're thinking about constantly so many things, and like, I don't know, the kind of mental and physical and emotional exhaustion that I feel after I've made
Keep going, just
sorry, I dropped my paper. It was really funny. We're gonna keep that in. Yeah, the kind of exhaustion that you feel after you've made the show is really, really intense sometimes. And you know, I'm getting a little bit older, and I'm realizing that like I just need to look after myself a bit more, make sure that I'm treating myself good, and like making sure that I'm like in my mind keeping myself really positive as well. It feels really like, you know, sometimes you can have really stressful conversations like trying to pitch plays to places, or when you're not employed, sometimes that's really hard, or like when you're assisting and you feel like you're like you don't have any currency, or you don't feel like you are like feeling creatively fulfilled. It is really easy to like, I don't know, like become a bit negative and like, I don't know, fall into a bit of a dark place. And I think it is like really important that we think about like well-being, because you know, I've seen scenarios where like stressed directors end up, you know, treating other people quite badly because, and it's just because they're like feeling a lot of tension and anxiety, and not because they are really nasty people. Sometimes it's just like a kind of like, I don't know. It's like a kind of like deflection from what they might actually be feeling, or a manifestation of like their own tensions and anxieties and stuff. And I think, yeah, it feels really important to like think about like looking after your mind and looking after your body and getting good sleep and eating well and drinking lots of water in tech and stuff like that. The next bit of advice that I would give is like to be yourself. Like, it's a really difficult journey. It's a kind of like lifelong thing to like discover who you are. We're always changing, like scientifically, we're always changing. Our bodies are always changing. Our minds are always changing, and that's absolutely okay. But the one thing that I realized that I think has been really useful for me is that like who I am specifically and individually is like the greatest currency I have. Not trying to be a director, like take on the like attitudes and behavior of a director, like coming into a room and being really authoritative, or you know, and that might be really important to do at times, but like if your nature isn't to like march into a room and like go, right, everyone in order, then it doesn't make sense to do that. And I've realized that like my mind, my body, what I feel, though, that's my vessel for the work. Like all of my instincts have to come truly from me. And if I keep thinking about like what other people think and what other people might think and what other people might say, then I feel like in a way I'm not really doing the work. I'm kind of doing it on behalf of people who aren't even in the room. And so it feels really important to kind of like trust yourself and believe in your ideas and believe in your instinct. Yeah, because I think people respect that as well, and people can sniff when you're not being real. So yeah, be yourself. And then the last one that I have, I think is arguably the most important one, is to be kind. I think our industry can be like really difficult. You know, there's all sorts of arts cuts, and that means that people have less to give. It means we have less time. It means there's more strain on people in our industry. And that means that people are more stressed. And I think like being kind is like probably the most like, I don't know, I think it's the most like important thing to kind of buffer all of the difficulties that we're facing in the arts. But also something that has never made sense is like how in an industry where we are meant to be like really empathetic and emotional creatures, there is so much like brutality and grotesque behavior. And like we're moving into a different era narrative of what being a director is, and what being an artist is, and what working in theatre and in the entertainment industry should look like and feel like. And I feel like being kind is like becoming a really, really important part of like being an artist as well. I think that's it.
Brilliant. Cool.
Thank you.
Can I ask you one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
So, has there been one bit of advice that you were given that you hold on to?
Yeah, this director who I really, really respect, called Topher Campbell, he gave me like one of my really early kind of assistant opportunities. he said to me one day, and it really make sense until a few years later, but he said that like your name is currency. And so that means that you should think about the way that like people will talk about you, and allow that to kind of reflect the way that you treat people, allow that to kind of like reflect your work ethic. And it felt really useful because, this is an industry where people like, in a really brilliant way, talk and share thoughts about working with different people. And I think, having foresight and knowing that like the way that you treat people doesn't just exist in the one space that you're in, but like that travels further. Like just being aware that like your name can carry good weight or bad weight. And to kind of look after that, it's your brand. Which is a slightly weird corporate-y kind of thing to say, but it's show business.
But it also goes back to saying like be yourself, because you as an artist is what you're saying about the world, which is the thing that
absolutely
kind of makes you who you are and why people go to see the work that you make.
Yeah,
So
absolutely, absolutely,
back,
yeah, very true.
Grand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.